Welcome to the podcast ABCs of Parenting Adult Children. Please join us as we discuss parenting adult children and the unique struggles that it comes along with.
Hello and welcome to ABCs of Parenting Adult Children podcast. My name is James Moffett and I'll be your host. Our guest speaker today is Kim Frasier. She's joining us on our podcast episode. Hello, Kim.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Do me a favor and introduce yourself to the listening audience.
Well, my name is Kim Frasier, and I am the author of a book entitled Chandler the Handler, You Can't Bully Me. And the goal is to make it into a project film.
Awesome.
Yeah. In the book, Chandler introduces a different way of handling school bullies. Instead of being reactive, using physical force, he becomes proactive, where he's using his intelligence to convince the bullies that it's not worth what they're doing. So he becomes the leader. He becomes a leader in trying to help bullies understand they're more valuable than their fist. And I really think this would help a lot of communities worldwide to keep the violence down.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so we have a private Facebook group that we have on Facebook and for supporting parents. We started out in 2015 and we had 10 users or 10 members, and now we're up to 1.3 thousand members. And so this podcast was created to sort of parallel that Facebook group. And obviously we probably have people listening that are not part of that group, but we deal with the age groups between, let's say, 12 and 40, right? Since it's parenting adult children. And I know that, from my experience as a child, I used to, at first in a little town in Quinlan, Texas, I would get on a bus to ride back and forth to school, but then I was bullied, and it was just easier for me to walk the mile and a half to school, unless it was real bad weather, and then I'd catch a ride with my coach, live 2 streets over. But bullying is absolute. It's just a epidemic. It just happens everywhere.
Everywhere, yes.
Especially on school buses, because school buses are, they're just crammed full of kids. Bullies are everywhere, and there's nowhere to escape to. And the bus drivers are so busy, driving the bus, they don't have time to deal with that kind of stuff. And I would imagine most of them were told not to intervene.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to write that book?
Well, I actually wrote this book in the 90s.
Really?
It's been out there for a while. And what inspired me, I taught school for 18 years myself. And that's why I wrote the book, noticing that kids were very reactive. They did not even consider a different approach when they're dealing with bullies. It is intimidating to get bullied, but at the same time, you don't need to use physical force because it doesn't do any good. It just makes it a continuous pattern of negative behavior. It really encourages the bullies to do more. But
right.
See, they get even more brazen. So you want to trick them in a sense. Like when I was growing up, I'm from the Bronx, New York, South Bronx, and there would be some girls coming at me. Of course, they were speaking a different language, so I didn't understand them. But at the same time, I could read their facial features, and they were ready to do something to me. So I pretended like I was having an epileptic attack, and they were running from me instead of coming toward me. That was the only thing I could think of, to scare them off. So there are other tools you can use in order to get away from bullies or to set an example. That you could talk things out, that you're not making yourself look good just because you're using your fist and stealing someone's bike or doing something negative. That's just too easy. It's too easy. It's too easy.
Right.
So really, basically, Chandler in the book, he teaches kindness, although people may think, oh, well, that's played out. Believe you me, we're all adults and we're all human beings. So we know what kindness is about. And most times, if you think about the bullies' backgrounds, they're lonely people. They're trying to prove something to someone. They don't have any self-esteem, or they feel like this is all they're able to do. Maybe they don't have supportive families or what have you. And this is what they resort to. And that's how gangs are formed. It's lonely children with no parenting So they develop their own parenting style, which is all negative. You see, we have to stop this. And for a while, it was really in the spotlight, bullying. Now it's kind of went dark and
Right.
everything else is taking over that. But bullying is still going on. This is what leads to school shootings and people getting hurt on the bus or on the way home, and just it accumulates into something like a somewhat of a war
Right.
that kids are fighting, and they need the necessary tools to fight this war. And that's what Chandler does, introduce a different way of making the bully feel bad about what they're doing.
So do you have a copy of your book you can show the audience?
I do. I can get it right now.
Okay.
This is the book here, Chandler the Handler, You Can't Bully Me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the back look like?
The back is actually an autobiography of myself.
Okay. There
And
you
my
go.
background growing up in the Bronx. Because,
All right.
in the South Bronx, that's all there was, bullies. There was bullies
Right.
everywhere. But, I had a fifth grade teacher that told me that just because you're bullied doesn't mean you have to go ahead and retaliate using physical force. Set the example. Sometimes it's best to just walk away and just do whatever you're planning on doing. Don't pay it a lot of attention unless you have to. If
Right.
you have to, use a different strategy. In this book, that will be a short film, Chandler actually invites the bullies to a baseball game that he's going to pay for. So they're shocked. They're like, "Okay, I'm trying to steal your bike, and you're inviting me to a baseball game?"
Right.
They take him up on it. They have fun. They become friends. And one of the bullies talks to the other bully and says, Chandler's been so nice to us. Let's return his bike. And they did. And so human kindness still goes a long way. I still believe in human kindness.
I agree.
So, parents could encourage that too with children. Because Chandler goes home and asks his mom, what should he do about the bullies? His mom says, well, take leadership ability by changing their minds. Give them something they're not expecting. And that's exactly what Chandler does.
All right. So I want to read this from your profile. It says, exploring how to empower young adults in situations of bullying and promote peaceful communications. And I think that's very good. And I think it's a skill that parents really ought to be teaching at home, And
I agree.
My wife is a special ed teacher, and I think for the most part, she doesn't really deal with bullying too much because the classroom size is fairly small. She's a resource teacher, so the regular ed teachers or the regular special ed teachers send students to her all through the day, and she helps them with math or reading or science or whatever, learning how to speak, whatever the skill set is that they're struggling with, and that's what she does as a resource teacher. And so she doesn't really deal with that a whole lot. But I know in regular education and K through 9, high school, especially in high school, one of the things that one of the reasons why I wanted you to be a guest on this podcast is because bullying it's absolutely a problem. It's been a problem for centuries. And it's interesting that you wrote that book in the 90s, and it's even though you wrote it in the 90s, the subject matter is very relevant to today, right? And
absolutely.
One of the things that my wife has noticed, especially when it comes to parent-teacher conferences, like as a special ed teacher, she has an IEP for each individual child, right? It's a legal document that the school has to formulate, and they have action items and things that they have to do in order to provide special education for the child, right?
Yes.
And so they have IEP meetings, and when she has a child that's really acting out or is a problem in the classroom, she's always wondering, well, where do they get this behavior from, right? And so what happens is the parent shows up, and it's like the child personified. The parent is teaching the child how to have bad behavior, how to use bad language, how to raise their voice, how to throw things, exhibiting violent behavior, and disruptive behavior. And she's like, there's no wonder that child is the way they are when that's what they live with. That's what they're learning at home.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things I would encourage parents, life gets stressful and things happen. And I get that. I raised 4 kids of my own with my wife. I understand parenting can be a very stressful and joyful experience, right?
Yes.
But a lot
Yes.
of that depends on the environment that you establish in your home. And if it's a loving and a kind and even, if you have an even temperament and you're loving and you don't raise your voice a lot, you don't yell and scream, you don't slam your fist on the table, you don't overreact emotionally to your child, then that's the kind of behavior the child's going to learn. They're going to learn how to love. They're going to learn how to be
Yes.
kind. They're going to learn how to think before they act,
Right.
but that's the
And
thing
they're
that
going
the
to learn
parent's got to model.
empathy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
They'll
parent
learn
has to
empathy.
model this behavior. Because
Yes.
that's
Yeah. I'm sorry.
no, you're fine. One of the things I was
Yeah.
going to say is that they're like my parents back in the 70s and the 80s. My parents said, "Don't do as I do, do as I say." Right? So
Mhm.
there was a double standard.
Sure. Yeah. I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I own a private practice in mental health. I've been doing that for 10 years. And I get a lot of parents that tell me, well, they say things, well, I don't know what to do with the child. The child's acting out at school. And then my first thought is what's going on in the home, as you mentioned.
Right.
Because if they're acting out at school, they're learning it from somewhere. And most likely it's the home. So we have to be cognizant of how we settle differences within the home.
Right.
That's done peacefully. So children could learn to do that when they get in front of other kids that are bullying. Settle
Right.
things peacefully.
And the things that we do learn or don't learn in our home carries over into adulthood, right?
Yes.
And
It's called the
if you
Karen
don't
attitude. Yeah.
if you don't learn coping skills and communication skills when you're at home with your siblings or your parents, but when you go through, get into high school and you go into college, or you don't go to college, you go to trade school, or you just get a job and you work, how as well as I do that the world doesn't really care about your feelings. The
No,
world doesn't.
no.
They don't. You're not special little Johnny to everybody you meet on the street or in your
No, not at
workplace,
all.
right? And
Right.
you don't get a participation award, and you basically have to earn everything you get, right? That's just the way it is. And
No entitlement. No entitlement.
no, no. And so it's very critical that we encourage parents to manage emotions and, like you said, be proactive instead of reactive. There's times that our kids are going to come to us and say, well, guess what I did in school? Or you're going to get a phone call as a parent from the principal or the teacher and go, well, little Johnny was expelled because he hit this other kid in the eye or acted out or exhibited disruptive behavior in the classroom or whatever. And so
Yeah,
the parent has to deal with that, but how you deal with it is so important. You
that's true.
you don't you don't want to just blow up. You don't want to react in a violent or a destructive way, because it's just teaching your child that that's the way you're supposed to react, right? And
Exactly.
it is so
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. We all do things that we might say, well, I can't believe I did that. Because in the back of your mind, you've learned that somewhere, you've seen it somewhere.
Right,
And
right.
normally it's in the household. So whatever you want your child to be, you need to be first. You see, whatever you want your child to do, you need to do it first. Because they are learning from your example.
Yeah,
The family is a teaching ground. Yes.
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that not only is it important that parents model this behavior in front of their children and teach them the communication skills and the coping skills that they need to be well-rounded, full, loving people that other people don't mind being around. But what are we watching? What are the kids watching on TV?
Oh, thank you.
Right? What are the
Yes.
what violent video games are our kids and young adults and teenagers playing? Halo and all these shoot 'em up, games where they're going through
Fortnite.
these virtual realities and killing things, and there's no remorse, and it's fun, and
Yeah,
you hear about all these school shootings, and you're like, how much of that garbage did that child consume
that's
with
exactly right.
through video
Yeah.
games, right? And so we
Yes.
we as parents have to be careful what we consume on the TV set, on cable TV in front of our children. And if we're watching 59 versions of John Wick all the time, right?
Yeah,
What are the kids going to be seeing? John Wick going through New York City on a rampage, killing everybody in sight,
right.
right?
And why are we not creating other kinds of movies? Why can't we just balance this out and create another type of not we are bombarded, consumed with violence or negativity. And
Right.
that's a teaching tool also. The
Sure.
TV is cable, all of that,
Right.
streaming, but we're action filled and we're killing this and bombing that. Well, children, they absorb that and they use it to create their own weapons, per se. And then there's social media, there's so much of it.
Yeah, social media is another topic altogether.
Yes, it is. It's a
So
humongous topic.
So one of the things that was speaking of streaming services and things like that. Have you seen the movie Homestead?
No.
Okay, so the Angel Network. It's called the
Mm-hmm.
Angel Guild Network.
Okay.
It's faith-based programming, and they're creating movies. And Homestead is a movie about. It's kind of a spoiler alert, but it's about the end times, and it's about I think that EMP is exploded off the West Coast, and the power grid goes down, communications
Mm-hmm.
goes down. It's just total chaos, and it's about how these two families come together on this guy's compound. He's well off, and he's got this really nice compound and house and land and a big fence and all this other kind of stuff. And they're Christians, and part of the programming is about faith, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
the Angel Guild Network has lots of other shows and movies just like that. And so that's a wonderful alternative for parents to watch. And I'm guessing that you're a person of faith, and I'm a person of faith. We go to church. We try to, we're not perfect. We're sinners saved by grace, and we, every day we walk out our faith or try to, and we make mistakes. We ask God to forgive us, and you just move on day to day and do the best you can with what you have. And so it's like you said, there are alternatives for parents to look for, but
Yes.
they may not know those alternatives are there. And so part of this
Yeah.
podcast episode is parents, there's other programming that you can watch,
Yes.
you
And
know.
there's one that's going to be out soon, and that is Chandler the Handler on short film.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
you
we're going
go.
to film. Yeah, we're going to film it in New York City, where I'm from, in the Bronx.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm excited, but I think that all people, all communities need to be at least presented with this alternative to violence.
Right.
You see, like you said, people need to see that there are other ways of having fun, enjoying your life. You don't have to be shoot 'em up, bang, bang to
Right.
have a good life or to be happy. In fact, that makes you miserable in the long run.
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
when I was a child in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have social media. The
No,
personal
I didn't
computer
have
didn't
it
come
either.
out until after 1980, right? And
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
so my entertainment was reading books and going outside and playing basketball in the backyard or riding my
Oh,
bicycle
yeah.
down the street, right?
Mine was going to museums. I love museums
Oh
and
yeah.
libraries.
We did have a library about 20 miles, 15, 20 miles north of us, and my mother took my sister and I to the Greenville County Library, and my mother
Mhm.
would check out 20 books, I'd check out 20 books, and my sister would check out 20 books, and we had 14 days to read them. So
Yeah,
my mom and I read our 20 books within about 7 or 8 days, and we'd swap them. My
very
sister
nice. That's
my
a great
sister was a
idea.
little she was a little bit slower reading than us, and so I read during the 3 months that I was out summer vacation. I read, I don't know, 200 books or
See there?
something like that.
There you
And
go.
it's we live in a different era, a different time,
Yeah.
and there was the industrial revolution and
Hmm.
industrial complex, and our parents worked in factories, and mom stayed home and took care
Right.
of the kids, and now we're in the technology age, right? And so
Yes.
everything's online, high speed internet everywhere, and so there's social media is just full of there are some good aspects to social media.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't want to say to parents that all social media is bad, because it's not.
No.
But there are some aspects of social media that we need to be cognizant of, and like there's predators. We need to make sure who are our kids talking to online. They just came out with a new app. I forget what the name of it is, but it's a new app that allows people to chat with other people, right? And
Yeah,
that's because why is it so appealing to people? Because people, especially teenagers and young adults, they're lonely. Even though they've
they
got
are very
wall-to-wall
lonely.
entertainment, they're very
Yes.
lonely, and so they're looking
Bullies are
for
lonely. Bullies are
yeah.
lonely people. How is it that an 11-year-old child is able to put on a social media a video on how to hang themselves? And one of
Oh,
my little clients, unfortunately, did that to herself.
oh no,
11 years old.
no,
Oh
that's
no,
horrible. It's horrible. Yeah,
absolutely horrible. And that scares me for the young people. We need to bombard them with good things,
right.
with positive messages, with
Yep,
hope and confidence in themselves, and not all this violent, negative. All it does is rip society apart. It rips families apart. It rips
right.
everybody apart. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to ask some of these questions. What do you see? What do you see as the root causes of bullying behavior?
I believe that bullies, as I stated before, are people that feel abandoned or have been abandoned by parents. Parents are their first connection to love. And if they feel like their parents don't love them, no one else does. So they go out and they seek revenge in the form of attention, doing violent things because they don't have anything to go back to. No foundation, no healthy foundation.
Right. How can parents of adult children apply anti-bullying strategies?
It's all about how you raise your child. There should be a domino effect. You raise your child using kindness and communication skills to make it a win win, and it passes down to your child. When they grow up, they're going to do that with their child. We want to pass that message down instead of the wrong message, instead of handling disagreements in a negative way. We don't want that type of legacy. We want a positive one.
So, parents, nobody gets a manual when you have children, right?
No.
And so it's a constant learning environment, right? And it's a dynamic, constant shifting and changing
Yeah.
environment for the family unit. And so maybe the parents didn't come from a loving family. Maybe they didn't have a good childhood, and so they're parenting their kids the way they were parented, which is one thing that I almost did. And I had to learn not to be heavy-handed and not to be violent with my children. And I had to learn how to demonstrate love to my children and show them unconditional love. And even when they
Yes.
did something wrong or they did something bad, I still love you, but we have to address this issue and we have to make this
Right.
a learning experience. So we have a lot of parents out there that are still learning how to be good parents, and they're still learning. They are. How would you suggest to parents that don't necessarily have these skills right now? How would they pick those skills up?
Well, there are tools out there. There's books and there's parenting skills applications that they could, kind of investigate. And there's groups out there, parenting skills group on how
Right,
to deal with children, how to conversate with them, how to really help them to see that problems could be solved by communication that's not negative. You don't have to agree with one another, but allow each other to transfer each other's whatever your thoughts are. Parents need to be listeners as well as speakers. Don't just tell the child, show the child.
what's the role of empathy in preventing bullying among young adults?
Put themselves, the parent or whoever the young adult is, put themselves in the child's position. How would they feel if they're being bullied? How is that going to make them feel good about themselves? You're tearing someone down instead of building them up. It's easier to tear someone down than to build them up. Do the courageous thing, build them up.
So speak words of affirmation. Be positive instead of negative.
Yes.
Look for the good.
Yeah.
We as adults, especially as adults, what do we do the first 30 or 45 seconds that we meet somebody? We're automatically sizing them up. We're judging
Yeah.
their character. We're judging how they
Yes.
look. Do they smell? How do they,
Mm-hmm.
we
Where they
we are
come from and
yeah, we're so quick to analyze people and go, okay, well this is what in our mind we
we're
have this
stereotyping.
stereotyping them, and they may be the complete opposite of what we're thinking, right?
Yes.
And we do that to our children too. And when you have a child that you're struggling with, whether a young child, a teenager, a young adult, we have to be careful not to stereotype them. And
Right. Exactly.
when we look at Johnny, we can't think, well, that's bad Johnny. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we have to find the good in him and focus on that, and then help.
Right.
And when you do that, and you have a positive outlook. When you're looking for the positive in that person, then it helps you to deal with the other stuff, right?
Right.
Because
And you know what? It's the behavior that's bad, not the child.
right, right,
You know, separating those two is so important. How we say those words to a child. Because if you say that the child, what they've done, what you may say the child is stupid, that's horrible. What they've done is not correct, but the child is fine because the child is imperfect, just like we are. And we
right.
all make mistakes. You're allowed to.
And that's how we learn,
That's right.
right? That's how we all
Yes.
learn. Parents make mistakes, we learn from them.
Yeah.
If we forget to pay the light bill, they shut the lights off, guess what? We learn a painful lesson. We're like, oh crap, I need to pay the light bill.
Exactly.
If your car's being towed down the road by a wrecker because you forgot to make your car payments, guess
Right.
what? You're like,
Exactly.
oh snap, I need a budget.
Yeah.
I need to figure out how to make my car payments.
Cause and effect. Exactly.
Yep. So how does the concept of mind over matter apply to overcoming bullying?
Well, instead of looking at the direct action of the bully, think about how the bully is really feeling. Go behind the scenes and think about, well, what would make a person act the way they're acting. Maybe they have no family, maybe they've been abused themselves or been kicked around. So you have to pity the bully in a sense in order to find your ways of trying to help them. Pity them first. Have some empathy for them because they're lonely people. So looking behind the scenes instead of right at the actual actions of the bully.
All right, so let's do a little hypothetical situation. So you have a child that's on a school bus. He's in the back of he or she is in the back of the school bus, and the big bad bully is picking on him.
Hmm.
Right? We've all been there,
Yeah.
and Lord knows it's not a fun place to be, right?
No.
And so different children have different temperaments, right? And
No.
so
Yeah.
you'll have some children that have a violent temperament, and so they just come up swinging, right? You
Right.
know,
Right.
and
Right.
and then you have children that are meek and mild, and maybe
Hmm.
they're flowers on the wall, and they're you know they're
Yeah.
they're they don't have the mental or psychological makeup to be aggressive. And so
Right.
so how does that child counter the big bad bully on the bus?
The one that don't have the tools, they don't know how to handle it because they're shy and they're more uh, introvert.
Right.
They need to be taught. They need to be taught by the parent, number one, on how to deal with bullies, and that bullies are not someone to fear; they're someone to help. You
Right.
see, when we change the composition or the definition of what a real bully is, we get to understand their weakness. We get to understand what they're suffering from, and then we show them a better life. So the parents need to explain to the child what's behind that bully. What could that bully be suffering from? Do they have a foundation? Do they have a nice home? Do they have things to make them feel good about themselves? Most likely they don't. So
Right.
we introduce a different side, something positive.
Yeah, and I guess the parents need to be aware of their children's moods and
Yeah.
how they're acting, and be able to identify, hey Johnny, how was your day? How was
Hmm.
school? Did something happen on the school bus? Sometimes the kids will act in such a way that if you're paying attention to them, and you're physically and emotionally present and mentally present in their life, then you
Yeah.
you can tell that something may have happened, and so at
That's
that point,
that's when you know your child. That's
yeah,
when you really know your child.
and that's when you can intervene, and you can provide comfort to the child, and you can console them. And then that's when you can start building those interpersonal skills and those communication skills. And also there are times that you've got to teach your child how to escape. Right?
Right,
There's
exactly.
there's times that words will work, And there's times where your child needs to learn how to escape and get away from the danger.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. No doubt.
So could you share a personal story that illustrates successful bully intervention?
Well, I remember not too long ago, there was one instance whereas when I was teaching, about 3, 4 years ago, no, maybe longer than that, probably about 10 years ago, there was a fifth grader that was shy. And the bully he had everybody under control. This was a young lady. So he was trying to bully her into dating him. Believe it or not, fifth graders. Unbelievable. Well, what she did, she was shy, but she was able to reason with him by telling him, "You're trying to make me do something. Why don't you ask me to do something?" You see, he was trying to bully her into having a date with him, but he didn't ask her.
Right.
And so she just came out and said, "Why don't you ask me?" So basically, bullies don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to get what they need or what they want. So
Right.
they try to use force.
Threat and coercion.
Yes, threat and coercion.
Yep. Well, that's awesome, and I'm excited about your book, and I'm excited about the upcoming short movie, and I hope hopefully you'll share that with me so I can share it with my social media folks and all of that. So
Absolutely, yes.
so in summary, what would you tell parents?
Parents need to get to know their children individually because all kids, just because you're in the same family, doesn't mean you know them all. They all have different personalities. And so getting in touch with who they are and meeting them where they're at and trying to use reasoning skills with them so that they could know for themselves what they need to do is the groundwork for success when their kids are faced with bullies.
Very good. Kim Frasier, thank you for being on our podcast episode today. And to my listening audience, I'm going to say thank you for the privilege of your time. You can listen to this podcast you can actually watch the podcast video episode on Spotify. And on Spotify, the about page for this podcast, you can see there's a URL, a website that I've set up for this. And on that website, you'll see contact information. You can leave me a voicemail or you can leave me an email and upcoming show schedule. I've got one of the pages that says the video releases, the podcast episode releases come out. I come out with a new episode every Friday at 8 a.m. And you can leave a review. If you listen to a podcast episode and you like it, click on reviews at the top of the page, and give us your name and tell us what you liked about the podcast episode. You can also listen to the audio version of the podcast on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Public Radio. Thank you for the privilege of your time and have a blessed day. And Kim Frasier, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, it was wonderful.
Thank you.
Please tune in next week for another episode of our podcast on parenting adult children.